Oops, I'm not able to share my screen.
Let me fix that for you. Sorry, didn't see a last name. Wasn't sure which Ben you were. There you go.
I'm the other Ben. Oh, let's see. Hang on. That one. Okay. So yes, I'm Ben Tupper. I'm a research associate at Bigelow Laboratory for Ocean Sciences. I'm filling in today for my colleague Camille Ross, who had a freight train come through her schedule, and I'm happy to do it because I love talking about this kind of stuff. I want to make sure I do a little shout out today to Alex and Felipe, who, if you're not watching the R stuff in the background of the support that goes into it, they've been doing backflips to make this work for us, and we have a nice robust setup now. So thank you. That was well done. I wanted to not really do a visualization in R. I really wanted to kind of share with you my journey, in a sense, of what my perspective on the use of R in geospatial data is and how it can play a role or not play a role. And I feel like I'm in a pretty good position. I've been doing this for, a couple of decades now, supporting the scientists at Bigelow Laboratory. So I think I have stuff to share. I'll try and end up with some examples of how you can use a particular software paradigm in R, because there's multiple ones, just like in Python, for managing and working with spatial data. So I'll just share with you kind of the path we've decided to go down. But as you may or may not know, in R, you can handle both vector type data, point data, and contours and polygons and all of that, like you see on the left here. And so this is an FVCOM physical model for the Casco Bay region here in Maine. And then a student wanted to test out and develop a drifter. And so she dropped the drifter in and monitored its position, and then came back to the lab and tried to match up, like, what's the exact same drop-off location and time relative to the tide stage to see, how well it does. So you can do that kind of stuff in R. And on the right, you're seeing the forecast from Copernicus for, it looks like sea surface currents for a couple of days from now. So you can kind of get into raster data and doing some model analysis. So there's a lot available in R. There's a lot of different vehicles for working with spatial data in R. And I'm not suggesting I know the right answers on all of these things, but I can share with you what we found works. So continuing along that theme and thinking of this as a view, oopsie, hang on. If I make that a little smaller, if it's too small, I can make it bigger. But the view of R, it's a programming language. What it does, though, to handle an awful lot of processing is pass things off to very well-established external libraries. So GDAL, GEOS, S2, Proj, it goes on and on and on. Pass that stuff, all that kind of standard but well done algorithmic stuff off to packages that already exist outside of R, and then bring the results back into R to continue your own analyses using R's pretty wide variety of statistical tools for analysis. So it's a pretty simple system in terms of it's like heavy duty wrapping of other software. So this is, Ben's view of where things have been with R and where they're going. So back in the 90s, shortly after R, started, there were a number of relatively small packages, map data for making maps and displaying data on different projections. A decade later, there was an effort to harmonize all of that, make it so it worked consistently for a lot of people and read standard data formats. So there was RGDAL, SP, there was RGEOS, there was a number of packages, and they really became the workhorses for most people. There was an extension to that over the next decade in the raster package, which is a pretty powerful routine. It could handle all sorts of gridded data sets. And it also had the ability to make a decision about when you were running short on RAM and start doing disk operations. So you could do a lot of extensive computations. Yes, you had to page the stuff off to RAM, but you could get it done pretty efficiently. And so it's a terrific package. More recently, and how you define recently, it depends on who you ask, but let's say over the last 5 to 8 years, there's been a bit of a split. So it's kind of this continuing evolution. We now have a package called Terra, which has absorbed what raster did and what the basics of the SP package did to manage both raster and vector data. So that's kind of in one direction. And in another direction, there's this new SF and STARS direction. SF stands for simple features, and STARS stands for space-time arrays. So it's for handling vector and raster data set. And those two play together pretty closely. And it's not a competition to the death of one or the other, but there is obviously some tension about, okay, which way am I going to go? How am I going to invest my time? And I'd like to point out to you that after decades of doing this, this is the skill set I have developed the best. This is my strongest point, and that is knowing when it is that I'm facing a decision, not what decision to make, but knowing that, oh, geez, I got to decide something here. Because this kind of a pattern in software happens frequently. We all encounter it. But anyway, we've decided in our relatively small shop to invest in the SF and the STARS project. And I'm going to say it's not an easy decision. We've invested a lot in Terra, but STARS and SF seems to be moving in the direction that we want to go to. So what I want to show now is what kinds of things we've been developing with SF in particular, and then with STARS. And I should mention that I'm showing this as a rendered web page, but this is also a runnable R Markdown file on the Jupyter Hub. If you go to the tutorials, you can pull all of this stuff. So we thought we would start with some sample point data. Jonathan happened to show this to you yesterday for the CalCOFI series. So what we're showing here is a series of stations that are occupied for samples. It's done twice a year. The vessel starts at the lower right, I believe, and ends up at the top. This particular picture from their website shows 75 stations. Actually, they're up to 113 now. They're also towing instruments in between each station. So it's a rich set of data available, I think, by request. I don't know that it's all publicly accessible. But we thought we would just use it as an example, a set of locations for spatial information. So now I'm going to make my screen a little bigger because I don't have my reading glasses on. Oh, excuse me. Awkward. Oh, nope. Start. Somebody forgot to silence his phone. So Jonathan and I and others have developed a package that will serve up some of these example data sets. It's called this XYZT package. I hope that's big enough now. And you can just read in a table of information. And if you're not that familiar with R, an awful lot of information gets read into data frames, which you can just think of as like a spreadsheet, very flat object, where each column has to have the same number of rows, and then each column can have a particular data type and a name associated with it. This is a particular type of data frame called a tibble. It's still just a data frame. Think of it as a simple spreadsheet. We've also can transform that into a spatial object. Now, this is going to be using the SF package. It comes with a number of different functions for doing very simple, quick transformations. You provide it that table of information. You tell it what columns contain the coordinate information. In this case, we're just saying it's a two-dimensional X and Y, but you could have X, Y, and Z. You could have X, Y with T. You could have all sorts of combinations. just to give yourself some spatial location information. And then we also, in this case, are giving it a coordinate reference system for the XY dimensions. This happens to be a code for a very generic latitude, longitude combination on a particular datum. What you get back is, at first blush, it looks pretty complicated, but at the heart of it, it's still just one of these tables. That's, whoopsie, what's that? It's just one of these tables with all this information. But you'll notice that where we originally had station, lat, long, and depth, we now have absorbed longitude and latitude into a new list column. It just means a complicated data structure column of point class, and it knows that its units are in degrees. We still retain the original depth and station. So it's just a data frame, but it's picked up this attribute in addition, where it knows something about where it's located spatially. So it knows it's a point type of an object. It knows that it's just X and Y dimensionality. It knows the bounding box and the coordinate reference system. So nothing too fancy. And if you're familiar with pandas, this would be just like a pandas table, but that's spatially aware. Things you can do with it are just like you can with any list-like object, which a data frame is a list-like object. In R, if you use a single square bracket to subset or select a variable, what you get back is the same class of variable, but you only have depth now. If we had selected station, we'd have station. All of the spatial information gets carried along with it. That's a little different than saying, I want the actual data. What if I really wanted the depth values? Then you would just promote yourself to using a deeper drill down. So use 2 square brackets, and that's going to yield whatever that data type is. In this case, it's a double precision real number, and you can do something like make a histogram of it. And that's, yeah. So this kind of surprised me. I know nothing about California, the waters off of California, but it really surprised me that you either have a lot of shallow water or a lot of deep water and not much in between.
Ben?
Yeah.
There's a question popped up on the Slack. So someone's saying this is their first time hearing about R programming, and what is an SF object?
Right. So simple features object, it's beyond the scope of R itself to define simple features, but it is a standardized way of encoding features, which are just records from whatever planet you're standing on, at a particular location, maybe a particular depth or altitude. It could be a box that you've drawn, and then you've got information about that box, what's in the box, what's around the box. You collect all that information, and that becomes your feature. Simple features was originally inspired to help promote interoperability in these different software environments. How do you communicate where that information is as you communicate what that information is? So if it's temperature or whatever, you can communicate temperature, but what's the standard for communicating where it is? So simple features outside of the R universe is a method for doing that. One of the things it introduces is well-known data, meaning well-known formatted data. So in this particular case, it asks everyone to encode their location data in particular formats, whether it's text or binary, so that software developed in Java or R, if they know it's a simple feature, they can read it in and write it back and be able to exchange that data nicely. I'm not sure I've given the full answer to that, but it's a little bit hard to answer because it's a beyond our kind of a question.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, people are sharing some links as well within
Perfect.
the Slack.
Great.
So, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm happy to be interrupted with questions. In R, just like with in Python using pandas, there are all sorts of functionality for sorting data, for taking slices of it out, for filtering it, for just like certain groups, that kind of stuff. Very, very, very similar. So I thought, well, I could, just drawing on this plot, I'd like to pick out all of those locations that are just between, say, 2,000 and 3,000. So there aren't too many stations. I've just called them mid-depth ones. And I'm going to just apply a filter. And I'm filtering the depth column between 2,000 and 3,000 meters. And then I just print it. So I'm using the same pipe operator that Jonathan had showed before, which essentially just takes the output of one function and inserts it into the first argument location for the subsequent function. So it's perfect for people who are lazy like me and don't like to type a lot. But it does kind of make a nice visual flow of what are you doing to the data. So it's a great way to hand stuff off to folks. So in this particular case, the feature set, which originally had 113 of those stations, now is down to 5 and just 2 fields, station and depth. We don't count the geometry as a field itself. It's now kind of part of the attribute sets for that feature. And I can't remember what the bounding box was before, but obviously it's a different bounding box now. It's just automatically computed. So anyway, you can do very simple filtering. There's also slicing, there's arranging, there's so many different what are called verbs for managing this data. So out of the box, the SF package does provide lots of graphing capabilities or plotting capabilities using base R. If you know much about plotting in R, there's all sorts of different paradigms. There's ggplot and lattice and this one and that one. It's just a smorgasbord of options. And sometimes it's just painful to figure out which one is the appropriate one. So I'm just going to show the base plotting. It's simple, it works very well, and it's pretty configurable. And of course, it works anywhere without a lot of effort. So what I thought I'd like to do is just plot from our spatially aware object, just plot the station locations. And I decided to just draw a line between them just so we could get a sense of it. And you can see, I think that might be in blue, the location starting from the lower right and then the last station up here on the upper left. Then I decided to plot those mid-depth ones. So here's taking data from the mid-depth and superimposing it with these purple circles. And this blew my mind because I didn't have a sense of like the California coast. Remember I said there was like a few shallow points, a lot of shallow points, and then there were a lot of deep points, not in between. So, you know, not knowing any better, you can guess that it must be a fairly steep drop off. Then I just wanted to throw text onto it. And so in order for me to locate the text, I actually had to drill in to our object and ask for, give me the raw coordinate information for those stations, and then just use the label is the station ID itself. And then I throw on a pretty coarse map of California and Mexico. So very basic, quick, easy to do, low cost, and it works in pretty much any destination device, PNG, PDF, web pages, whatever you need. So that's for point data, which is, you know, part of the vector universe of polygons and lines and contours. Then we can turn our attention to regularly sampled data, which if you have a grid, that would be an example. One thing we can do with this XYZT package that we offered up is take a collection of points, your collection of points, and find the minimum bounding box around them. So just a square rectangle, not square rectangle, goodness, just a rectangle around them that snaps as tightly as it can around those. And what you get back in this particular case is a polygon. And so it's still a, you know, two-dimensional object. It still has 2 fields, which is interesting because you might recall we had 113 features. And out of this, we're getting 1 box with 1 row. So where does it get the station and the depth? We just chose arbitrarily, it's the first one. If you need something else, you can program in what you need those to be. Maybe it's the average depth or the, I don't know, something else. Or maybe you want to drop those all together. Now you'll notice one thing is the well-known text has changed a little bit. So we have our list column of geometry. It's now a polygon rather than a point. It still knows that it's in degrees. And now you can see the longitude, latitude points are gathered together and in a comma separated series. I know because I wrote this that it's just 5 points, you know, as you go around the box, and then you're closing it by making the first point and the last point the same. However, it's still spatially aware. It knows where it is on this particular planet. Now, in order to grab some raster data, we needed to make a function, and we're going to be grabbing some of the Muir GRIST, you know, group for high resolution sea surface temperature. Anyway, it's a high resolution daily sea surface temperature product. And so we had to just come up with some kind of a simple function to do that. Why? Because we wanted to get 2 different days of data. So you can see we're asking for 2 days. One is kind of in the late summer, early fall. One is in late fall, early winter. We're calling this function that we have prepared up above. And it's one thing I love about R and Python is you can just make functions on the fly to do something for you, even if you never use it again. It just does all the heavy lifting. So just to very quickly follow through what this does, the first thing it does is it constructs a URL to the Muir data sets. Muir, I guess, is the way that GHRSST data products are served. It opens up a NetCDF connection, so basically a handle to it. We use a package that we developed with the XYZT to extract that bounding box, from the NetCDF object. And then because we're polite people and we pride ourselves on remembering to clean up after ourselves, we close it, and then we just return that that object, whatever it is that we decided to extract, return it to the user. So in day 1, we're going to get the results from the fall. Day 2, we're going to get the results from the winter. So what is in this thing? So here I'm printing out just day 1. So it's a stars object, so one of those space-time arrays, and it has 2 dimensions. Well, go down towards the bottom of the display and you see your dimension. Oh, why did we do the dimension information all down in here? And stars objects always present their dimensions. You're not limited to 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions. You can keep right on going if you want to. It's all built out. So you can have very complicated space-time arrays. But it does provide you with a common output of like, what is it? So it gives you the indices from the first position to the 923rd. When you do subsets of this, it would properly compute what the actual subset indices are. The offset for the first one is, in this case, it's going to be longitude. So it's the first longitude coordinate. And I think this is the upper latitude. And the reason I'm guessing that is since the delta, that is the side step of the grid cells, is negative. So we must be going down. Whereas for longitude, it's positive. It tells you what the reference system is, which is the same one we saw before, just a simple lat-long grid. If this happens to be a very regular grid, meaning every grid cell is the same size and shape, so it's just kind of boring rectangles all mushed together. If it wasn't, if it was a curvilinear grid, something that stretches in weird and very pretty ways, then it would actually provide us with a listing in here of what those actual coordinates are. We could drill in and get them. And then this is because of the flexibility built into SF, you can't guarantee that the X dimension is going to be called X. So at some point, the software has to guess that. You could override it. Maybe you got them backwards. You could override this, but this is what the software is guessing. So this is, to me, is more of a confirmation that yes, this is longitude and then latitude. Now, in that file that we did some data extraction, there are 5 attributes or 5 variables. And so there you go, you're getting to see all of them listed. So unlike a regular table or data frame, it's not listed vertically, across the top with columns. They did it sideways. One reason they did it sideways is so they can show you kind of a summary set of statistics for each one. So for Analyze SST, you get the minimum, the first quartile, the median, the mean, and the count of NAs. And the NAs, of course, is, you can picture that bounding box way up here. The bounding box that went around this obviously covered an awful lot of California and Nevada. So those are all going to be NAs in any sea surface temperature map. So it's not a data frame per se. However, the authors of the package have made it very data frame-like. You might recall that we used a single square bracket for subsetting or selecting. And when you do that, you get the same class of object back, but just with the columns or variables or attributes that you selected. So here you're seeing we get just Analyze SST back. But again, all of the spatial information comes along for a free ride. If you do a deeper subset, so you really want the actual values, then you're going to go back to the double square brackets, and you'll see that what you get out of it, I'm just using this STR and ARVs, kind of like querying the structure. Present to me what this is without spraying, thousands of points across the screen. So anyway, that's the temperature in kelvins, and you can see it's a matrix. It's got 2 dimensions. So many rows and so many columns. Now, we could actually, since each are day 1, day 2, 2 different time steps, we could actually combine these pretty easily. In R, you use the C function for concatenating 2 different objects together, smushing them together. In this particular case, the C function for the stars objects knows that you might want to specify, like, along what dimension do you want to concat these? Are you literally taking, 2 side-by-side grids and swishing them together, or are you going to stack them? So in this particular case, I'm saying, look, we're going to stack them along a new time dimension. I give it the 2 dates, and then what pops out now is an object with not 2, but 3 dimensions and the 5 attributes. So it's really the same thing, with the exception here, you'll see that time has been added. It knows, the first index and the last index. It knows the offset, which is a date object. For the first one, it knows the delta is 95 days, and it knows that the reference system is, in this dimension, obviously is not a spatial one, but is a time-based one. The other thing it does is it modifies this quick look in the summary. Now, instead of seeing a summary of all the cells, we're seeing a summary of just the first 100,000. And that's just so it doesn't have to scan through all of the data. You can imagine a larger stack of images. You could spend a lot of time waiting for it just to print a summary. So the decision was made to just cut it off after a certain while. Yeah. Okay. I find this kind of interesting. Sea ice fraction is all NAs. What is up off of California? They never get ice? Can we do something about that? Doesn't seem fair. We get all the cold weather up here. Anyway, let's try, oh yeah, I wanted to show if you did that deeper subsetting. So you drill in deeply, just give me the actual numbers. What form do they come back in? And you'll see for this layered object, it's now not just a 2-dimensional matrix. It's, oopsie, go away. Uh-oh, am I still on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything went good.
Something weird happened here. I'll push that away. Okay. So anyway, I forgot where I was. Yeah. Oh yeah, you get a 3-dimensional array. The next thing is about like, how can I marry up those Kalkofe points to the actual cells in these different layered objects? So one thing you could do, and there's multiple ways to do this, but one thing you could do is leverage in the stars package. There's this ST extract. If you see ST and you're wondering, why do they prepend everything with ST? It stands for space-time. And anyway, you just say, look, out of that day one object, that was the fall temperature regime, at the X locations, would you get me the data? And so what gets printed out is, ta-da, a simple features object. And now it's picked up the 5 different variables that are in the file. And otherwise, it's just like all the other stuff. It's just a spatially aware data frame. It's kind of nice. I thought, just as a for instance, to try, I don't do this very often. I thought it'd be interesting to picture yourself on the ship and you're dragging these instruments along. How could you marry up the actual track rather than just the stations where sampling is done? How could you marry up the track with that sea surface temperature data? So you have to go through a few humps and make some assumptions, but essentially what I do is I say, look, take the point data and turn it into a 1 feature object, but that 1 feature has 113 different points associated with it. So rather than 113 individual features identified by station, just don't do that. Smush it into 1 feature, 113 points associated with it, convert it into what's called a line string. Now, essentially what you're saying is it's not just discrete points. Now we're saying it's a sequence of points in the order that I already provided you. So that's now a path as opposed to a collection of points. And then I segmentize it. So I'm saying, look, picture yourself at one of those points. Every 500 meters, pick up another point and add it to the set. Pick up another 500, add it to the set, and so on all the way along. Obviously, as you're going between arbitrarily located points, that last one's going to be probably less than 500, except by some amazing coincidence. So, but most of them in this now segmentized path are all 500 meters long. And then I recast it back into a point type. So you can do a lot of this switching back and forth without any real penalty, and you end up with the type of data you want. There is one little thing here that is subtle, and that is, you'll see now I get a geometry set for almost 20,000 features. So first of all, it's geometry set. We haven't really talked about that, but essentially we're saying it's only the geometry. There is no other metadata associated with it. There's no columns of variables. The other thing is, obviously, we went from 113 points to almost 20,000. That's from the segmentizing. But otherwise, it's just like any other object. And we could add features to this. I mean, add variable data. So what I wanted to do is now plot these. And so in the base R plotting, if you want to show the 2 stars objects, here's the temperature map on the left for the late summer, and this one is for early winter. And then you can specify what's called a hook, and that's just a function that does whatever you want it to in each subset plot. So here I'm just taking what did I call it? I called that thing path. So here I'm just taking path and I'm drawing it in orange, and I'm using the tiniest little dot I could think of, symbol, just so that it would not obliterate itself with huge wide dots. So anyway, that's the path that the ship took along our theoretical segmented line. Then I got to thinking about, well, could I get the SST value for each location along my path? So I don't know why I do this. Anyway, I did that. I recast it to point. It already was point. And then I'm saying, do that extraction for just the analyzed sea surface temperature at those points. Remember, there's about 20,000 points. And sure enough, you get 20,000 features with 2 fields. You get the temperature for the late fall, early fall, and you get the temperature for late fall, and with the geometry locations. So now I thought, well, this would be fun. Let's just go back and see if there's any structure there we can, visually pull out. First thing I did was I took that sea surface temperature data that I just extracted, and I made another column by mutating. And that column I'm calling just the difference, and it's just the difference between those two. It's the colder temperature minus the warmer temperature, or later minus earlier. I do the same kind of a plotting, and I'm also in my hook now, I'm plotting the difference column, and I'm just saying make the colors have a pretty distribution, the breaks in colors. And this is what you get, which I thought was kind of cool. You can almost see, in particular on the fall, you can see a little bit of a pattern where the differences are amplified, where there are changes in you can see the background temperature. Here's another one here. I have no idea what this all means. I'm not an oceanographer myself, but it looked cool. So that pretty much concludes what I have to share. Just kind of a walk through the kinds of stuff we do in our mostly R shop with spatial data. Happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Ben. That was great. There are no other questions on the Slack channel at this time. It doesn't look like anyone is typing them, but I encourage anyone to ask any questions, put them on the Slack anytime. Ben and Jonathan are around and are kind of monitoring that and can answer any questions at any point. That was great, thank you. And so we can, at this point, I think we have 15 minutes.